My parents funded my sister's lavish wedding, then handed me the bill. I am Ruby, 29 years old, working as a marketing executive in Chicago. Despite our differences, my sister Grace and I have always been close. When she got engaged to Jake, a wealthy doctor, I was thrilled for her. My parents announced they would throw an extravagant wedding at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Everything seemed perfect until I noticed odd comments about financial contributions during planning meetings. Something felt off, but I ignored my instincts. I never imagined that after the celebration, I would receive a bill that would change everything. Before I tell you how I turned this family betrayal into my greatest triumph, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe if family drama stories strike a chord with you. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While other kids enjoyed carefree summers, I was the straight-A student with perfect attendance who worked part-time jobs since I was 16. My sister Grace, 2 years younger, was the social butterfly who could charm her way out of any trouble. My parents adored her effortless charisma, something I never possessed with my more serious demeanor. Our childhood home in suburban Michigan was comfortable but not luxurious. Dad worked as a bank manager while Mom taught elementary school. They emphasized the importance of education and hard work values I embraced wholeheartedly. But there was always an unmistakable difference in how they treated us. When I needed a graphing calculator for advanced math, I saved my babysitting money for months. When Grace wanted expensive soccer cleats despite barely playing, they appeared within days. When I got accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship, my parents congratulated me, but immediately stressed how expensive the remaining tuition would be. When Grace got into a state school with no scholarship, they celebrated for weeks and promised to cover everything. I convinced myself these disparities were minor, that my parents loved us equally, but just connected more easily with Grace. And honestly, who could blame them? Grace was sunshine personified with her infectious laugh and ability to light up any room. I loved her too, despite the jealousy that occasionally bubbled up. I graduated with honors in marketing and communications, having paid my way through college with a combination of scholarships, student loans, and working 30 hours a week at a campus coffee shop and as a research assistant. The day I received my diploma, Dad hugged me and said, "You always find a way to make things happen, Ruby. So independent." At the time, I took it as a compliment. Now I recognize it as the first explicit acknowledgement of a pattern that would define our family dynamics for years to come. Ruby would figure it out. Ruby would make it work. Ruby would find a way. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and secured a position at a digital marketing agency. Over 7 years, I worked my way up to senior marketing executive. My job was demanding and stressful, requiring long hours and constant client management, but the financial stability it provided gave me immense pride. I had built something for myself, by myself. Meanwhile, Grace bounced between several majors before settling on communications. She lived in an apartment our parents helped furnish and drove a car they bought her as a graduation present. When she struggled to find work after college, they supported her through 6 months of unemployment before she landed an entry-level position at a PR firm. Despite these differences, Grace and I maintained a close relationship. We talked weekly, visited each other when possible, and genuinely celebrated each other's successes. She never asked for the preferential treatment, and I never resented her for receiving it. My frustration was directed entirely at our parents. 3 years ago, my father had a health scare. What doctors initially feared might be a heart attack turned out to be severe arrhythmia requiring medication and lifestyle changes. During the 2-week crisis, I took emergency leave from work and drove home to Michigan. I paid for specialists to review his case and covered the cost of medical equipment not included in their insurance. The total came to nearly $8,000 in amount I never expected to be repaid despite my modest salary and student loans. Grace was backpacking through Europe at the time, a trip partially funded by our parents as a 30th birthday present. She called daily for updates but couldn't return immediately. I handled everything from hospital paperwork to making sure Mom remembered to eat. When the crisis passed, Mom hugged me tightly and whispered, "We are so lucky to have you, Ruby. You always know what to do in an emergency." Dad, still weak but recovering, squeezed my hand and promised, "We will not forget this, sweetheart." I thought perhaps this incident would shift our family dynamic, that my parents might finally see me as clearly as they saw Grace, that my contributions, both financial and emotional, would be recognized and valued equally. I was wrong. 6 months later, life had returned to normal. Dad was healthier than ever following his new diet and exercise regimen faithfully. Mom had joined a book club and seemed more socially active than she had been in years. Grace had returned from Europe and met Jake, a surgical resident, at a hospital fundraiser where her PR firm was managing communications. When I visited for Thanksgiving that year, I noticed my financial contribution during the health crisis was never mentioned again. The new patio furniture and kitchen renovation, however, were proudly shown off gifts from Grace, who had started earning commissions at her job. David, my boyfriend of 2 years, noticed my quiet withdrawal during the drive back to Chicago. "They do not see how they treat you differently." He observed, his hand steady on the wheel. "Maybe they never will, unless you point it out." "What good would that do?" I asked, watching barren trees blur past my window. "It would just create tension. Besides, I am an adult now. It should not matter anymore." But it did matter. And deep down, I hoped that as we all matured, as Grace and I established our careers and adult identities, perhaps the imbalance would naturally correct itself. Then Grace got engaged, and any hope of that happening evaporated like morning dew under a scorching sun. It was a crisp October evening when Grace called me, her voice pitched so high with excitement I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "He proposed!" she screamed. "Ruby Jake proposed! I am engaged!" I squealed appropriately, demanded photos of the ring immediately, and listened as she recounted every detail of the rooftop proposal overlooking Lake Michigan. The ring was stunning, a 3-carat diamond in a platinum setting that must have cost Jake a small fortune. "We are thinking spring wedding," Grace gushed. "Something intimate and meaningful, maybe 70 people tops." That sounded reasonable and aligned with what I knew of Jake. Despite coming from a wealthy family, he seemed unpretentious and careful with money, traits I admired. His parents owned a successful chain of pharmacies throughout the Midwest, but Jake had insisted on paying his own way through medical school with scholarships and loans, just as I had done for my education. 2 weeks later, I flew home for the official engagement celebration. What was described as a small family gathering turned out to be a catered event for 50 people at my parents' home. "Just immediate family and close friends," Mom explained, arranging elaborate floral centerpieces that must have cost hundreds. "Jake's parents are coming, and we want to make a good impression." That night, I met Jake's family for the first time. His parents, Thomas and Elizabeth Harrington, were polished and reserved, but warmed considerably after a glass of wine. They spoke proudly of Jake's work as a pediatric surgeon and asked thoughtful questions about my career in marketing. "We always taught our children the value of financial independence." Elizabeth said, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she reached for her water glass. "Jake insisted on making his own way just as you did." I smiled, wondering if she knew how differently Grace and I had been raised despite growing up in the same household. As dessert was served, my father clinked his glass and stood. "Joan and I are so happy to welcome Jake into our family," he announced, his arm around my mother's shoulders. "And we want to give these two lovebirds the wedding of their dreams. We will be hosting the celebration at the Grand Plaza Hotel this spring, with no expense spared for our precious daughter." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. The Grand Plaza was Chicago's premier wedding venue, where basic packages started at $75,000. Grace's eyes widened. "Dad, that is too much. We were thinking of something smaller." "Nonsense," Mom interjected. "This is your special day. We want it to be perfect." I caught Jake's expression, a mixture of surprise and concern, quickly masked with a polite smile. Later, when we had a moment alone in the kitchen, he confided, "This is very generous of your parents, but Grace and I were planning something much simpler. I do not want them going into debt for this." "That is just how they are with Grace," I said, trying to keep any trace of bitterness from my voice. "They have always given her everything." Jake studied me for a moment. "And not you," I shrugged, uncomfortable with his perception. "They paid for her college. I worked my way through. Different approaches, but we both turned out fine." He seemed about to say more when Grace bounded into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "Can you believe it? The Grand Plaza, Ruby, you have to help me plan everything? You are so organized and you have the best taste. And just like that, I was drafted into wedding planning service, my reservations swallowed along with the lump in my throat. Over the next few weeks, what had started as a modest spring wedding for 70 guests morphed into an extravagant June affair for 250 people. Every decision seemed to exponentially increase the budget, from the venue upgrade to include the rooftop terrace to the insistence on a designer wedding dress. During a cake tasting appointment, I finally broached the subject with my mother. "This is getting really expensive," I said, carefully watching as she approved the addition of gold leaf detailing to a 6-tier cake. "Are you and Dad sure you can afford all this?" Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Your father and I have been saving for Grace's wedding for years, and we will have family contributions as well." That phrase again, family contributions. I had heard it several times now, always vaguely mentioned, then glossed over before I could ask for clarification. "What family contributions?" I asked directly. "Are Jake's parents helping?" "They are covering the rehearsal dinner and honeymoon," Mom replied, deliberately focusing on the cake samples. "The rest will work out. Your father always says these things have a way of balancing in the end." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I called Sophia my best friend since college that evening. "I cannot shake this feeling that something is not right." I confessed, pacing my apartment while balancing my phone. The wedding budget keeps expanding, but no one will talk actual numbers. And they keep mentioning family contributions in this weird, evasive way. "Maybe they expect Jake's family to chip in more," Sophia suggested, "since they are supposedly loaded." No, I was at a dinner where that was explicitly discussed. The Harringtons are covering the rehearsal dinner and honeymoon, which is already generous. My parents are on the hook for everything else. Could they have taken out a loan, or maybe they have savings you do not know about? I considered this possibly, but Dad has always been extremely conservative about debt, and I just cannot imagine they have 6 figures sitting around for a wedding when they made such a big deal about not being able to help me with college. Have you talked to Grace about it? "She is so happy, Sophia. Every time I try to bring up anything budget related, she says Mom and Dad insisted they want to do this for her. She believes they can afford it." "What about your dad? He is the financial planner of the family, right?" I tried last weekend when I was home helping with invitation stuffing. I asked him directly how they were managing the costs. He just patted my arm and said, "We will figure it out later. This is Grace's time to shine." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "That is not reassuring, Ruby." "I know," I sighed. "But what can I do? They are adults. If they want to spend their retirement fund on a one-day celebration, that is their choice." "Just be careful," Sophia warned. "I do not want you getting dragged into their financial mess." I laughed at the absurdity. "What are they going to do, hand me a bill afterward?" The universe, it turns out, has a twisted sense of humor. Despite my misgivings, I agreed to be Grace's maid of honor. I loved my sister, and regardless of our parents' financial decisions, I wanted to support her. I threw myself into the role, organizing a beautiful bridal shower, helping select bridesmaid dresses, and serving as the voice of reason when Grace's occasional bridezilla moments surfaced. If only I had paid more attention to the warning signs. If only I had pressed harder for answers. If only I had protected myself from what was coming. As the wedding date approached, the extravagance reached levels that made me increasingly uncomfortable. What had started as an already expensive venue at the Grand Plaza Hotel now included a premium package with upgraded linens, lighting, and exclusive use of both the ballroom and rooftop terrace. The $75,000 base price had surely doubled with all the additions. Grace's dress alone was a designer masterpiece that cost $20,000 with hand-sewn crystals and a cathedral-length train. The bridesmaids, myself included, were dressed in custom-made gowns that cost nearly $1,000 each, though at least I was permitted to pay for my own. The floral arrangements were being imported from 3 different countries. The dessert table would feature a famous pastry chef's creations, in addition to the elaborate cake. The band was a well-known Chicago group that typically played at charity galas, supplemented by a string quartet for the ceremony. "Is that ice sculpture shaped like Grace and Jake?" I asked incredulously during a planning meeting at the venue. The event coordinator was walking us through a digital mock-up of the reception space. "Yes," Grace clapped her hands excitedly. And there will be a champagne fountain beside it. Is not that fabulous? My mother nodded enthusiastically while making notes in her wedding planner. I noticed she never wrote down any prices or totals. Mom, I said carefully when Grace was distracted by flower arrangements, this is getting really extreme. The champagne fountain alone must cost thousands. She patted my hand absently. We want this day to be perfect. Grace only gets married once. Statistically speaking, about 40% of people get married at least twice. I muttered, earning a sharp look from my mother. Do not be difficult, Ruby. This is not about money. It is about celebrating love. A convenient philosophy when you are planning to spend someone else's money, though I did not know that yet. Later that week, I accidentally discovered something troubling. I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off some wedding favor samples and needed to use their printer. While searching for the right cable in Dad's desk drawer, I found a refinancing document for their home. They had taken out a new mortgage just 3 months earlier, accessing over $100,000 in equity. I felt sick. They had owned the house outright after paying it off 5 years ago. Dad had been so proud of that accomplishment, throwing a small mortgage-burning party and declaring it the smartest financial decision they had ever made. Now they had put their home at risk for Grace's wedding. That evening, I tried to discuss it with David over dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. I found refinancing paperwork, I said, pushing pasta around my plate without appetite. They have mortgaged their paid-off house to fund this wedding. David set down his fork. That seems extreme. Are you sure it is for the wedding? What else could it be? They were completely debt-free. Dad just turned 62 and was talking about retirement. Now they will have a mortgage payment for 15 more years. Have you asked them about it directly? I shook my head. I was not supposed to see those papers. And every time I bring up money concerns, they change the subject or tell me not to worry. David reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Ruby, I think you need to have a serious conversation with your parents. This is not just about the wedding anymore. This is about their financial future. I know, I agreed reluctantly. I will try to talk to Dad this weekend. But my attempt failed spectacularly. Dad deflected with jokes. Mom suddenly remembered urgent wedding details that needed attention, and Grace was completely oblivious, swept up in the excitement of final fittings and tastings. The bachelorette weekend in Miami added another layer of financial strain, though not on my parents. As maid of honor, I was expected to cover many of the costs. The beachfront Airbnb private yacht charter and exclusive club reservations depleted my savings by nearly $7,000. I told myself it was worth it to see Grace so happy, surrounded by her bridesmaids and friends, carefree and radiant in the Florida sunshine. The night before we returned to Chicago, Grace and I sat alone on the beach, watching waves crash under a canopy of stars. Thank you for all this, she said, unusually subdued after 3 days of celebration. I know it was expensive. You are my sister, I replied simply. I wanted to do something special for you. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I am so lucky to have you, Ruby. You always take care of everyone. Those words would echo ironically in my mind just 2 weeks later. As the wedding weekend finally arrived, even my concerns about money could not dampen the magic of the occasion. The Grand Plaza had been transformed into a floral wonderland with thousands of white roses and orchids, creating a romantic, ethereal atmosphere. The weather cooperated perfectly, providing a stunning sunset backdrop for the rooftop cocktail hour. Grace was breathtaking in her gown, and the look of adoration on Jake's face as she walked down the aisle brought tears to my eyes. Whatever my issues with my parents, this union seemed genuine and loving. During the reception, I delivered my maid of honor speech celebrating Grace's kind heart and the special bond we shared despite our differences. I welcomed Jake to our family and raised a toast to their future happiness. For that moment, everything felt perfect. Later, as guests twirled across the dance floor, I overheard a fragment of conversation between my parents that should have been another warning. We will discuss it all tomorrow after they leave for the honeymoon, Dad said in a low voice. No sense ruining the night with finances. Mom nodded, her expression briefly troubled, before she plastered on a smile as a guest approached. I should have cornered them then and there, demanded to know what they were planning. Instead, I accepted another glass of champagne and pushed the concern away. Tomorrow was soon enough to face whatever was coming. The next morning, Grace and Jake departed for their 3-week European honeymoon, a lavish gift from his parents, covering stays in luxury hotels throughout Italy, France, and Greece. They left in a shower of rose petals and well wishes, both glowing with happiness. As the last wedding guest checked out of the hotel, my parents asked me to join them for brunch in their suite. I assumed they wanted to review the weekend or perhaps just spend some quality time together after the whirlwind of the past few days. I could not have been more wrong. "Ruby, sweetie, sit down," Mom said, patting the seat beside her on the suite's elegant sofa. "Your father and I need to discuss something important with you." Dad cleared his throat and slid a folder across the coffee table. "We have all the wedding expenses organized here." I nodded, not touching the folder. "I am sure it adds up. The wedding was beautiful." "It was," Mom agreed. "Everything Grace deserved. But now we need to settle the financial aspects." "Settle?" I repeated, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. Dad adjusted his glasses, not quite meeting my eyes. "The total cost came to just over $220,000. I gasped. "That is more than your house is worth. We managed the initial deposits and smaller expenses." He continued as if I had not spoken. "But the final payments are due now. We need your contribution." "My contribution?" The words felt foreign in my mouth. Mom reached for my hand. "Sweetie, we always assumed you would want to do your part for Grace's special day. You are so successful in your career, and family helps family." Dad opened the folder and turned it toward me. There, on a spreadsheet printed in neat columns, was a breakdown of expenses, with a highlighted total at the bottom: $45,000. "You expect me to pay $45,000 for a wedding I had no say in planning?" My voice sounded distant, as if someone else was speaking. "Not expect," Mom corrected gently. "We know you want to contribute. You have always been so generous. Remember how you helped during your father's health scare? They were using that against me. The assistance I had provided freely out of love and concern was now being weaponized as precedent for this outrageous demand. We told the vendors you would be handling these specific expenses," Dad added, pointing to several highlighted lines. "The final payment for the venue, the flowers, and the catering staff." "You what?" I stood abruptly, the room spinning slightly. "You told vendors I would pay without asking me first." "Ruby, calm down," Mom said, her tone shifting from sweet to stern. "This is not like you to be so selfish. Grace is your sister. Do not you want her to have beautiful memories of her wedding day? This has nothing to do with Grace." I was shouting now, unable to contain the sense of betrayal washing over me. "This is about you making financial commitments in my name without my knowledge or consent." Dad stood, his face flushing. "Now listen here, young lady. We have supported you your entire life." "Supported me? I worked through high school and college. I paid my own tuition while you covered everything for Grace. I have been financially independent since I was 18 years old." "That was your choice," Mom interjected. "You always wanted to do things your way, because you gave me no alternative." The unfairness of it all crashed over me in waves. "And now you expect me to empty my savings for a wedding that was your idea, not Grace's. She wanted something small and reasonable before you convinced her to go all out." "We thought you would be happy to help your sister," Dad said, his voice cold. "Clearly, we overestimated your family loyalty." That was the breaking point. Tears burned in my eyes as I grabbed my purse. "Do not talk to me about loyalty when you have been planning to exploit me financially all along. Those vendor contracts are in your names, not mine. I will not be paying a single penny." I stormed out, ignoring their calls to come back and discuss this reasonably. "There was nothing reasonable about ambushing your daughter with a bill for $45,000 for expenses she never agreed to." In my car, the tears came in earnest. I could barely see to drive and had to pull over in a shopping center parking lot. My hands shook as I called the one person who would understand. "David," I sobbed when he answered. "You are not going to believe what just happened." The week following the wedding was one of the most emotionally devastating periods of my life. I fluctuated between rage, hurt, disbelief, and a profound sense of betrayal that left me physically ill. I called in sick to work for 2 days, unable to focus on anything beyond the imploding relationship with my parents. David was my rock through it all. He brought comfort food to my apartment, listened to my tearful rants without judgment, and held me when words failed. On the third night, as we sat surrounded by takeout containers, he finally asked the question I had been avoiding. "What are you going to do now?" I stared at the fortune cookie in my hand unopened. "I do not know. They have stopped calling after I blocked their numbers, but they have started emailing, still insisting I need to do my part for the family." "Have you told Grace?" I shook my head. "She is on her honeymoon. I cannot ruin that for her. She deserves to enjoy this time with Jake without family drama." "This is more than drama, Ruby. Your parents committed financial fraud by telling vendors you would pay." I had considered this angle already. Technically, they never signed my name to anything. They just told vendors verbally that I would be handling certain payments. It is unethical, but probably not illegal. David frowned. "Still, you should talk to someone with legal expertise." I nodded, knowing he was right. "I will call Jennifer tomorrow." Jennifer was a friend from college who now worked as a contract attorney. The next day, I received an email that made my blood run cold. Attached were invoices from 3 wedding vendors, all addressed to me personally. Somehow, my parents had given these businesses my contact information and apparently convinced them I was the responsible party. I forwarded everything to Jennifer, along with a desperate plea for advice. She called me within the hour. "This is a mess, but you are not legally obligated to pay these bills," she assured me after I explained the situation. "Without your signature on contracts or agreements, they cannot force payment from you. However," her voice turned cautious, "your parents could face legal consequences if they sign contracts they cannot fulfill." "That is their problem," I said, surprising myself with the hardness in my voice. "They created this situation." "True, but I know you, Ruby. You will feel terrible if they face financial ruin regardless of how badly they have treated you." She was right. Despite everything, I did not want to see my parents suffer. I just wanted them to recognize the fundamental unfairness of their actions and take responsibility. While I was processing all this, Sophia came over with wine and a game plan. After hearing the full story, she was incensed on my behalf. "We need to document everything," she declared, pulling out a notebook. "Every conversation, every email, every invoice. Then we need to figure out exactly what your parents' financial situation is." "How would we do that?" "Public records," Sophia explained. "Mortgages, property taxes, liens, all that stuff is searchable online." "And did not you mention your dad has a brother in banking? Maybe he knows something about their finances." Over the next few days, a disturbing picture emerged. My parents had indeed refinanced their home, taking out a substantial loan against their primary asset. They had also maxed out 3 credit cards and taken a personal loan from their credit union. All this debt had been accumulated in the 6 months leading up to Grace's wedding. "They are underwater," I said to David after reviewing everything we had discovered. "Even if I gave them the $45,000, they would still have massive debt they cannot service on their income." Uncle Peter, Dad's younger brother, confirmed my fears when I carefully broached the subject during a phone call. "I tried to talk sense into them," he admitted. "Robert has always been financially conservative until this wedding. Something snapped when Grace got engaged to a Harrington. Suddenly, he was determined to put on a show, prove they were just as good as Jake's family." "Did they ever mention expecting me to pay for part of it?" I asked. The silence on the line was answer enough. "Peter." "They may have mentioned that you were so successful now you would want to contribute," he said reluctantly. "I thought they meant like a gift, a few thousand maybe, not this." The final piece fell into place when I discovered my parents had begun telling extended family members that I had agreed to cover a significant portion of the wedding costs. Aunt Linda called to tell me how generous I was being. Cousin Melissa sent a text thanking me for making Grace's dreams come true. The narrative was being established that I had willingly committed to these expenses, making any refusal now seem like I was going back on my word. It was manipulation at its finest. I scheduled an appointment with a therapist, recognizing that I needed professional help to process this level of family dysfunction. Dr. Marshall listened intently to my story during our first session, taking careful notes. What you are describing is a lifelong pattern of emotional and financial exploitation, she said when I finished. Your parents have consistently treated you as the responsible one, the one who will sacrifice for others, while simultaneously failing to recognize or value those sacrifices. But why? I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why treat Grace and me so differently? Family dynamics are complex, Dr. Marshall explained. Sometimes parents unconsciously assign roles to their children: the responsible one, the troubled one, the peacemaker. Over time, these roles become rigid, and parents respond to their children based on these assigned identities, rather than seeing them as complete individuals. So I am just the responsible one who will always bail everyone out. The idea was depressing. Only if you continue to accept that role, she said firmly. This situation, painful as it is, presents an opportunity to establish new boundaries and reshape how your family sees and treats you. Over the next 2 sessions, we worked on strategies for standing my ground while preserving the relationships that were important to me. I knew I did not want to cut ties with my family completely, especially Grace, but I needed to protect myself from further exploitation. Meanwhile, the vendors were becoming increasingly insistent about payment. I received calls and emails daily, all expressing confusion about why I was not honoring my financial commitments. I carefully explained to each one that I had never agreed to these payments and suggested they contact my parents, the actual contracting parties. As all this was unfolding, Grace and Jake returned from their honeymoon tanned and happy. Grace texted me dozens of photos and called, bubbling with stories of their adventures. I responded with appropriate enthusiasm, not ready to burst her bubble with the ugly reality waiting at home. That changed when she sent a text that made my stomach drop. Mom and Dad acting weird when I ask about final wedding payments. Everything okay? I could not lie to her. Not really. We need to talk in person. Can you come to my place tomorrow? Sounds serious. Should Jake come too? I considered this. Having Jake there might actually help, given his family's financial acumen. Yes, that would be good. The knot in my stomach tightened as I prepared to potentially damage my relationship with my sister forever. I spent the entire day cleaning my apartment and preparing for Grace and Jake's visit, as if pristine countertops and homemade cookies could somehow soften the blow of what I needed to tell them. David offered to be present for moral support, but I declined. This needed to be a conversation between family members, and I did not want Grace to feel outnumbered. When they arrived, Grace hugged me tightly, still radiant from her honeymoon. Jake carried a small gift bag. "We brought you something from Italy," Grace said, handing me the package. Inside was a beautiful leather journal with my name embossed on the cover. "For all your planning and lists," she explained with a smile. The thoughtfulness of the gift made what I had to do even harder. We settled in my living room, Grace and Jake on the sofa, while I took the armchair across from them. "So what is going on?" Grace asked, her expression shifting to concern. Mom changed the subject every time I mentioned wedding expenses, and Dad suddenly had urgent errands whenever I brought it up. I took a deep breath. "The day after your wedding, Mom and Dad called me to a meeting. They presented me with a bill for $45,000, expecting me to cover almost a quarter of your wedding expenses." Grace's jaw dropped. "What? That is insane. We never discussed anything like that." Jake's expression hardened, his posture straightening. "They specifically told us they were covering the wedding costs. That is why we agreed to the larger celebration." "It gets worse," I continued, passing them the folder containing all the documentation I had gathered. "They told several vendors I would be making the payments without ever consulting me. They have been using my previous financial help during Dad's health scare as justification for expecting this contribution." Grace flipped through the papers, her face growing paler with each page. "I had no idea the wedding cost this much. $220,000. That is more than our down payment on our house." Jake was reviewing the vendor invoices with a critical eye. "These have your name on them, but without your signature or any proof of agreement. This is highly irregular." "They have been telling family members that I agreed to pay," I added, creating a narrative that I am backing out of a commitment rather than refusing something I never agreed to in the first place. Grace set down the folder, tears welling in her eyes. Ruby, I am so sorry. I would never have allowed this if I had known. We wanted a simple wedding before Mom and Dad insisted on the Grand Plaza. I know, I assured her, reaching for her hand. This is not your fault. I do not blame you at all. But I should have noticed something was off, she insisted. All those times you asked about the budget, and they deflected, I just assumed they had savings I did not know about. Jake was still examining the financial documents. Based on what I am seeing here, they do not have the means to pay these outstanding invoices. They have already overextended themselves significantly. I know, I confirmed. They refinanced their paid-off house and maxed out multiple credit cards. Even if I paid the $45,000, they would still be in serious financial trouble. So what are you going to do? Grace asked, wiping away tears. I have consulted with Jennifer from law school. She confirmed I am not legally obligated to pay since I never signed any agreements. But I am worried about what this means for Mom and Dad if these bills go unpaid. Jake set down the papers and looked at me directly. Ruby, I want to be clear that neither Grace nor I expected you to contribute to our wedding costs. This situation your parents have created is completely inappropriate. Thank you, I said, genuinely grateful for his straightforward support. I think we need to have a family meeting. Grace decided her initial shock giving way to determination. All of us together, including Jake. They need to understand that this was wrong and find a real solution. I offered to help them create a payment plan, I admitted. Even though I am not giving them the lump sum, I said I would sit down with them and figure out how to manage the debt. They refused, saying I needed to just pay the amount in full. Jake shook his head. That is not a reasonable response. Look, my parents offered to help with some wedding costs beyond the rehearsal dinner and honeymoon. We declined because your parents insisted they wanted to cover everything else. Maybe we should revisit that conversation. That is very generous, I said, but I am not sure it addresses the underlying issue. This is not just about money, it is about respect, boundaries, and honesty. You are right, Grace agreed. This is about how they have treated you compared to me for our entire lives. I never saw it clearly until now. The three of us talked for hours reviewing options and planning our approach. Grace was devastated to learn about the extent of the financial disparity and how our parents had treated us over the years. Jake brought valuable perspective as someone who came from a wealthy family, but had chosen to make his own way. By the evening, we had a plan. Grace and Jake would speak with his parents about potentially assisting with some costs. I would prepare a formal response to the vendors clarifying my lack of financial obligation. And we would schedule a family meeting for the weekend. The days leading up to the confrontation were tense. My parents continued their campaign of guilt and manipulation, sending increasingly desperate emails and even showing up at my workplace one afternoon, causing a scene that embarrassed me in front of colleagues. They had moved from claiming I had agreed to pay to insisting I owed them this support after everything they had done for me. When Saturday arrived, I drove to my parents' house with a strange calm. Having Grace and Jake's support had strengthened my resolve, and the therapy sessions had given me tools to maintain boundaries without escalating the conflict. David waited in the car available if I needed him, but giving me space to handle this myself. Remember, he said before I got out, you have done nothing wrong. Stand your ground. Inside, Grace and Jake were already seated at the dining room table with my parents. Mom looked like she had been crying while Dad wore an expression of grim determination. Ruby, Mom reached for me as I entered. Thank goodness you are here. We can finally resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding. This is not a misunderstanding, I replied evenly, taking a seat across from them. You made financial commitments without my knowledge or consent, then expected me to fulfill them. We always intended to discuss the arrangements with you, Dad insisted. The timing just never seemed right before the wedding. The timing to ask me for $45,000 should have been before you told vendors I would be paying, I countered. We are family, Mom said, her voice trembling. Families help each other without keeping score. Grace intervened before I could respond. Mom, Dad, what you did was wrong. You put Ruby in an impossible position and you have been manipulating her emotionally to try to force compliance. Dad's face darkened. This is none of your concern, Grace. This is between us and your sister. It absolutely is my concern, Grace shot back. It was my wedding which I wanted to be small and reasonable before you insisted on turning it into a showcase. And now you are trying to stick Ruby with the bill. I placed the folder of documentation on the table and opened it methodically. I have here copies of all vendor contracts which you signed. I also have emails from extended family members indicating you told them I had agreed to pay, which I never did. Finally, I have a letter from my attorney clarifying that I have no legal obligation to cover these expenses. Mom began to cry in earnest. How could you involve a lawyer against your own parents after everything we have sacrificed for you? What sacrifices exactly? I asked quietly. You paid for Grace's education, but not mine. You have consistently provided financial support to her while expecting me to be independent. You even used the money I voluntarily gave during Dad's health emergency as justification for this current demand. That is not fair, Dad protested. We raised you put a roof over your head, food on the table. Basic parental obligations, Jake interjected calmly. Not special considerations that warrant financial reimbursement years later. Dad turned on him. Stay out of this, Jake. This does not concern you. It concerns me when my wife is upset and my sister-in-law is being treated unfairly, Jake replied, his professional demeanor never wavering. The fact is, I continued, you cannot afford this wedding you insisted on throwing. You have mortgaged your home, maxed out credit cards, and taken personal loans. Even if I gave you the $45,000, you would still be in serious financial trouble. We did what was necessary to give your sister the wedding she deserved. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Something you seem unwilling to contribute to. I deserved a college education. I responded, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I deserved equal treatment. I deserved to be asked, not told if I wanted to contribute to Grace's wedding. And I certainly deserved better than being ambushed with a massive bill afterward. The conversation continued to escalate, with my parents alternating between anger guilt trips and appeals to family loyalty. Every manipulation tactic I had grown up with was deployed in full force, but this time I saw them clearly for what they were. After nearly 2 hours of circular arguments, I finally laid out my position. I will not be paying these vendor bills. They are legally your responsibility. I am willing to help you create a reasonable payment plan and even contribute a much smaller amount as a wedding gift to Grace and Jake, which is what you should have asked for in the first place. But I will not be manipulated or guilt-tripped into financial commitments I never made. Then you leave us no choice, Dad said coldly. We will have to tell the entire family how you have abandoned us in our time of need. Feel free, I replied. I have already drafted an email to the extended family explaining the situation with documentation. I had hoped not to send it, but if you insist on continuing this narrative, I will defend myself. Mom gasped. You would publicly humiliate us. I would tell the truth, I corrected. Something that has been notably absent from your approach to this entire situation. Grace reached across the table for my hand, then looked at our parents. I am ashamed of how you have treated Ruby. You raised us to be honest and responsible, yet you have been neither in this situation. The meeting ended without resolution. My parents refused the compromise offered and insisted I needed to reconsider my priorities. I left feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely liberated. For the first time, I had set a boundary and held it despite immense pressure. The fallout was immediate and messy. My parents began a campaign to salvage their reputation by telling family members I had refused to fulfill financial commitments. Several relatives called to express disappointment in my selfishness. Others, who had received my preemptive explanation, reached out with support and shared their own stories of my parents' disparate treatment of Grace and me over the years. The final breaking point came a week later, when I discovered my parents had attempted to use the emergency credit card I had given them during Dad's health scare to make a $5,000 vendor payment. The charge was declined due to the limit, but the betrayal of trust was complete. I knew then that I needed to take more definitive action to protect myself and ensure the truth was known. After discovering the attempted credit card charge, I realized that half measures would not work with my parents. They were desperate and seemingly willing to cross ethical lines to escape the financial hole they had dug for themselves. It was time to be completely transparent with everyone involved and establish firm, unambiguous boundaries. First, I scheduled another meeting with Jennifer to discuss legal protections. She helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter to my parents regarding any representations that I had financial obligations related to the wedding. We also contacted the credit card company to report the unauthorized attempt and cancel the emergency card. This must be incredibly painful, Jennifer said as we finalized the documents. Taking legal measures against your own family. It is, I admitted, but continuing to enable their behavior would be worse in the long run for all of us. Next, I needed to ensure my relationship with Grace remained intact. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe midway between our homes. I want you to know that none of this changes how I feel about you, I told her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. I love you, and I am so happy for you and Jake. This conflict is with Mom and Dad, not with you. Tears welled in Grace's eyes. I feel terrible about all of this. The wedding was beautiful, but not worth fracturing our family. If I had known what they were planning with the finances. You could not have known, I assured her. They deliberately kept everyone in the dark. This is not your responsibility to fix. Grace wiped her eyes. Jake and I have been talking. His parents are still willing to help with some of the costs, especially since they had originally offered and were turned down. Not the full amount, but enough to take some pressure off. That is incredibly generous of them, I said, genuinely touched by the Harringtons' kindness. They think very highly of you, you know. Grace smiled slightly. Elizabeth said you remind her of herself at your age, making your own way despite having opportunities for an easier path. The conversation with Grace strengthened my resolve. This situation, while painful, was bringing clarity to family dynamics that had been dysfunctional for decades. Perhaps there was hope for healthier relationships in the future, at least with my sister. Jake followed through on his family's offer, and the Harringtons contributed $30,000 toward the outstanding wedding expenses. It was a gesture of goodwill that highlighted the stark contrast in how our respective families approach financial responsibility. Meanwhile, I drafted a carefully worded email to extended family members. I did not want to humiliate my parents, but I needed to correct the false narrative they had been spreading. The email included a brief factual explanation of the situation, along with scans of key documents demonstrating that I had never agreed to these financial commitments. The response was mixed but largely supportive. Many relatives expressed shock at my parents' behavior, while a few staunch defenders maintained that I should help regardless of prior agreements, because family comes first. Interestingly, the divide often fell along generational lines, with older relatives more likely to side with my parents, while cousins my age understood my position. Uncle Peter called after receiving the email. I had no idea it was this bad, Ruby. I knew they expected some contribution from you, but not like this. Your father and I were raised to be financially responsible. I do not know what got into him. Pride, I think, I suggested, and years of treating Grace and me differently finally coming to a head. Well, for what it is worth, I think you are handling this with remarkable maturity, he said. And I have told your father as much. With the truth now public and legal protections in place, I sent one final communication to my parents. It was not an angry letter or a list of grievances, but a clear statement of boundaries moving forward. I would not be contributing to the wedding expenses as they had demanded. I would not engage in discussions where emotional manipulation was used to pressure me. I would not accept responsibility for financial commitments I had never made. However, I remained open to rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms if they were willing to acknowledge the inappropriateness of their actions and commit to more respectful interactions in the future. The response was silence. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing from either of my parents. During this time, I continued therapy sessions with Dr. Marshall, focusing on processing my feelings and developing strategies for maintaining boundaries without cutting ties completely. Family estrangement is rarely a good long-term solution, Dr. Marshall advised, but temporary distance can be healing when toxic patterns are at play. Use this time to strengthen your sense of self and clarify what kind of relationship you want with your parents moving forward. The breakthrough, when it finally came, was unexpected. My father called on a Tuesday evening, his voice lacking the defensive edge I had grown accustomed to. "Ruby," he said quietly, "your mother and I have been doing some thinking and some talking with a counselor of our own. We would like to meet with you if you are willing." Cautiously, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop near my office. When the day arrived, I was surprised to find them already waiting, looking years older than they had just months before. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, and Dad's shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. "Thank you for coming," Mom said, her voice subdued. "We know we do not deserve your time after how we behaved." Dad cleared his throat. "We wanted to tell you in person that you were right. What we did was wrong, manipulative, and unfair. We have no right to expect you to cover expenses we committed to without your knowledge." The admission was so unexpected that for a moment I could not respond. "What brought about this change?" I finally asked. "Several things," Dad explained. "The family reactions to your email, conversations with Grace and Jake, the counseling sessions, but mostly looking honestly at our behavior towards you over the years. We always told ourselves we treated you differently because you were more independent, more capable," Mom added. "But the truth is, we put unfair expectations on you, while giving Grace more support simply because it was easier. You never complained, so we took advantage." It was the acknowledgement I had wanted for years, delivered with what seemed like genuine remorse. Yet I remained guarded, aware that financial pressure might be motivating this apparent epiphany. "What about the wedding expenses?" I asked directly. Dad sighed heavily. "We have worked out a payment plan with most vendors. The Harringtons' contribution helped significantly. We have sold our vacation timeshare and are downsizing to a smaller home. It will take years to recover financially, but that is our responsibility, not yours. All we ask for now is a chance to rebuild our relationship," Mom said, tears threatening, "on new terms with proper boundaries and respect." I did not commit to anything that day, needing time to process this apparent transformation. Over the following months, their actions supported their words. They attended counseling regularly. They respected my boundaries when I declined invitations or limited visit durations. They never mentioned wedding expenses or financial assistance again. 6 months after the wedding, we gathered for Thanksgiving at Grace and Jake's new home. It was our first holiday together since the confrontation, and tension lingered beneath the surface pleasantries. But there were also moments of genuine connection, of laughter, unmarred by underlying currents of manipulation. As we helped clear the table after dinner, Grace nudged me gently. "They are really trying, you know." Mom actually stopped herself from making a comment about my cooking and asked if I wanted help instead. "Small steps," I acknowledged with a small smile. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her eyes serious, "for standing your ground even when it was hard. You showed me it is possible to love family while still demanding respect. The road to healing our family relationships would be long and imperfect. Some wounds were too deep to vanish with a few months of good behavior. But there was progress, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen by my parents, not just as the reliable daughter who would sacrifice for everyone else, but as a person with my own needs and boundaries deserving of respect. Meanwhile, my relationship with David had deepened through the crisis. Having witnessed how I handled the situation, he told me he had fallen even more in love with my strength and integrity. On Christmas Eve, he proposed with a simple, elegant ring that represented what we both valued: substance over show, genuine commitment over grand gestures. When I called to share the news with my parents, their reaction was telling. "We are so happy for you, Ruby," Mom said warmly. "Whatever you want for your wedding, however you choose to celebrate, we support you completely." "And we expect to pay for nothing but our own outfits," Dad added with a self-deprecating chuckle. It was a small joke, but it acknowledged the elephant in the room and suggested they had truly internalized the lessons of the past year. As David and I began planning our own wedding, a simple ceremony in a botanical garden with just 50 close friends and family, I reflected on the painful journey that had brought me here. The betrayal had been devastating, but the growth that followed was transformative. I had learned to recognize my own worth, to set boundaries without guilt, and to demand the respect I deserved. The wedding bill fiasco, as painful as it was, became the catalyst for honest conversations and real change in my family dynamics. It forced long overdue recognition of patterns that had shaped our relationships for decades. And ultimately, it led to something I had never fully experienced before, a growing sense that my parents were beginning to see me, Ruby, clearly for the first time. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took advantage of your generosity or success? Did it change your relationships for better or worse? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries with family is not just okay. It is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for them. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to empowerment. Remember, true family supports your growth, not just their own needs.